Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Maney, and I'm the marketing specialist at Rook Quality Systems. I appreciate you all taking the time to join us today for our webinar titled Design Verification and Validation, Strategies for Regulatory Success and Commercial Launch. This webinar is presented by Rook Quality Systems and QuickVault. Just so you all know, the webinar recording and slide deck will be sent out to you all later today. All right, we're going to go ahead and start with our speaker introductions. So Jeff, you can take it away.
Perfect. Thanks, Jacqueline. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Hau. I head up product for QuickVault. I've been at Viva for 3 years now, and over time helped to build a QuickVault to where it is today. I've had many years of software product experience. Prior to Viva, I was at Amazon, and I've also been part of 2 startups to scale them up to mid-sized companies. And for me, really, it's what I love about my role, what I do, is being able to build out products that really give customers the delight and deliver value. Looking forward to demo more about QuickVault today and share you what we can do when it comes to DV&V. Over to you, Axel.
Thanks, Jeff. Hello, everybody. My name is Axel Strombergsson. I'm the Vice President for the QuickVault product that we're going to take a look at today at the end of this webinar. I've been with Viva Systems for about 2.5 years, and prior to that, I was in the medtech industry for about 20 years. I started off in R&D, led product development for a surgical device company, and later in my career, switched focus more towards device commercialization and operation. In aggregate, over these 20 years, I've been directly involved in 6 startups in the medtech space. And in addition to that, I also spent a few years at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, at the Tech Transfer Office, where I supported research teams on the medical center and engineering school in bringing medical devices more from bench to bedside. In addition to that, also been a very active startup mentor within various organizations here in the US and in Europe. So accelerators, incubators, and various type of organizations like that. Next slide, please. So the company that Jeff and I work for is Viva Systems. We are the world's largest provider of cloud-based solutions for the life sciences industry. We've been around for 17 years, close to 8,000 employees, and over $3 billion in revenue. We started our journey in the pharma space with providing software solutions to manage various regulated processes within quality, clinical trials, regulatory, and also on the commercial side with a CRM solution. 5 years ago, we took these enterprise solutions and brought them into the medtech industry. And already now 5 years into this journey, we have 19 out of the 20 largest companies using our products. You see some of the logos here, Baxter, BD, Medtronic, Stryker, and so on and so forth. So if you are a medical device startup company in the audience today, it's kind of likely that your future acquirer is one of our customers. Couple of things that we learned over these 5 years in the medtech space working with these bigger organizations. One is that we have a really good understanding of what industry best practices really looks like. The other thing that we learned is that there's really a need for a quality solution for smaller medtech companies. Next slide, please. And that is this QuickVault product that Jeff and I work on, which is an EQMS collaboration platform. From an EQMS perspective, it has everything that you would expect in terms of doc control and change control, quality events, training management. But on the design and development side, we have full automation around design controls, including risk management. We have built-in design reviews and risk reviews, which kind of makes this a very good platform to collaborate when it comes to design and development of medical devices. And we're going to check into this a bit later when it comes to managing design verification and design validation. To that too, we also have supplier management. As you know, typically during design and development of a medical device, you select your suppliers at that point in time. But more about QuickVault in a little bit. With that, I'm heading it. Oh, sorry. Next slide, please. High-level overview of value prop and differentiation for QuickVault. We kind of brand ourselves as the easy button for EQMS, and a couple of ways that pans out. One way is that we are completely out of the box, and we can be that by being fully validated. So not only when you get into the system for the first time, or as we release increased functionality or improvements of the software, the customer doesn't have to do any validation or revalidation from that perspective. We take care of all of that on our end. Since we are purpose-built for the medtech space, we have all the We are compliant with all the regulations and standards that you would expect in the major markets. Being a large organization as we are at Viva, up in the right-hand corner, we can also provide other value to our customers. We do have pretty advanced e-learning opportunities. We also provide a full SOP package for companies to be able to build that industry best practices quality management system that is included for free with a QuickVault subscription. Right-hand side in the middle there, something I think that we do really well at Viva is this continuous improvement on our software solutions. Our products are never stagnant. We continue to innovate together with our customers, which includes both adding new functionality, but also improving on the functionality that's already within, and that is the case for QuickVault. We do that without adding any cost or price to our customers. So basically, QuickVault is an appreciating asset over time. Lastly, when it comes to budget and subscription model, we do offer a month-to-month subscription. So we're not intending to tie up smaller medtech companies in multi-year agreements. If you're a startup, you can even pay with a credit card if that helps your cash flow. So with that, over to you, Cal.
Awesome. Thanks, Axel. All right, a little background on me. So I'm Kyle Rose. I'm CEO and founder of Rook Quality Systems. I've been a quality regulatory consultant for over 12 years now, advising all types of medical device companies, including leading multiple programs with the NIH, including RADx and supporting over 100 COVID diagnostics, advisor for multiple Fortune 500 companies on all aspects of quality and regulatory, including software and diagnostic devices. And then similar to Axel, and this is how we originally got connected. I'm an active mentor and advisor for a lot of startups, incubators, universities, things like that as well. So things like Mass Challenge, TMCX, NIH, UCF, a bunch of different programs that we support and are very active with. The Rook team has over 35 consultants. We have a global team, including a branch in Europe and a branch in Taiwan. We have 13 certified auditors, including former FDA auditors, former BSI, and notified body auditors, and support all types of medical device quality, regulatory for all types of devices. We work a lot with software devices, diagnostic devices, wearable and monitoring products, and provide hands-on support with creating your quality system, managing your quality system, creating your design files, your risk files, submitting your regulatory submission to the FDA, to the EU, wherever it might be, and then ongoing compliance, making sure you are staying compliant with your quality system going forward. We have multiple companies that use Rook as a quality as a service, so they don't have an internal quality team. They outsource all of their quality and regulatory support to Rook, and we manage that and make sure they're compliant going forward. For today's session, I'm really excited to talk about the design, verification, and validation for medical devices, what to do, how to plan your testing, how to make sure you're going to be successful with this testing. So this is following up from the previous webinar we did on kind of design controls and how to build out your initial DHF. And this is kind of the next phase into we've designed our product, now we need to test it so we're ready for that regulatory submission. And we want to make sure we're very successful and efficient with this process. We will have some time for Q&A at the end. So we are also going to try to juggle some questions as we go. So send your questions. If we don't get to them directly during the presentation, we'll have some time at the end to answer some questions as well. And typically we like to follow up with everybody if there's any unanswered questions after the webinar. So a quick overview on design V&V. So when we say design V&V, the two V's are verification and validation. So here, this is the definition from the FDA. So make sure that your outputs meet your inputs. So we talked a little bit about design inputs and design outputs on the last webinar, but design inputs are specifications for your product as to how it should work, form factor, things like that. And the outputs are the things that you use to define how you make your device. So drawing files, material specifications, software code, all of those are your outputs. And so this verification loop is actually testing that your outputs meet your inputs with formal protocols, external testing, things like that. The validation side is more aligned with the user perspective, that you created the correct device for your user base. So this is tied back to clinical trials, usability studies, and more like post-market testing and feedback to show that your medical device you've created is actually working and serving the people you intended it to work with. So this is the kind of high-level process of verification and validation. There can be some overlap as to what testing goes in which bucket. There's also different industries that look at this slightly differently, potentially like software or diagnostics might kind of mingle these a little bit as well. But for the very high level, most medical devices, this is the overview of how V&V work together, and this is the diagram directly from the FDA. When it comes specifically to testing, we're going to make sure that we are testing these inputs and the outputs, make sure the outputs meet the inputs, and the results of this design verification should be documented in the design history file. So just like everything else within the scope of the medical device quality system, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So it's critical to make sure that you are documenting your testing and it's going to be added to your design history file. This is one area we see a lot, especially with the software companies, when we come in and say, hey, have you tested this software? Do you know it works? And they always say yes, but very rarely do they actually have a record of the testing, right? So you can test the code yourself, you can do some pre-testing, but for the testing that the FDA or ISO auditors are looking for, you have to have formal documentation of your testing and then the results of the testing. So how do you capture and how do you complete that type of testing? So this is kind of the basic framework for how you would complete the testing. So you're going to first create a test protocol. So this is identifying what specific inputs and outputs you're testing. You're going to identify specifically the design testing process. So how you're going to test this device. Is it simulated use? Is it some external lab testing? Is it some benchtop testing you're doing, or potentially some analytical testing? All of those things can be considered part of this verification testing scope. You want to define the sample size and acceptance criteria of the testing. So both of these things are pretty critical for your testing to make sure that you define these properly. Acceptance criteria is how do you know that your test is going to pass or fail? So you need to define that in your protocol before you start testing. If you start testing and you don't have defined acceptance criteria, then you can just say after the fact, oh yeah, that passed, we're good to go, right? So you have to define your acceptance criteria before you start testing to make sure that your product and test actually is relevant to what you're trying to do. And then the sample size will determine how many tests you have to complete and what percentage have to pass for you to meet the requirements of this protocol. A sample size can be determined a variety of ways. I think either referencing actual standards that might call out sample size or requirements, or using a risk-based approach. So identifying with your risk analysis, higher risk devices should have more testing, or higher risk features, and lower risk features should have less testing. So that's a high level scope of how to determine sample size, but there are definitely more specific ways you can look into doing sample size as well. So once you've defined your test protocol, that should be signed off and routed in your EQMS. So in QuickVault, you can sign off your protocol, make sure it's been approved by the key people, the engineering, the quality team, the regulatory team, and you need to have that signed before you start testing. Once that's signed in the execute protocol, you go into actually doing the testing. So this is where you have people, operators testing your device and recording results. So you need to record these in good documentation practices in your lab using typically calibrated equipment, and make sure that people that are doing the testing have been trained on the protocol prior to starting the testing. Once all the testing is complete, then you summarize all the data, review the results, and describe any deviation. So this report is actually what you will provide to the FDA as to show that your device is safe and effective and meets the requirements that you've identified internally as well as any requirements defined by the FDA. And this report will be your record showing this testing to the FDA. Of course, with any testing, any manufacturing, things can happen, things can fail. So that's where the deviations can be captured. If somebody wasn't properly trained, or for some reason the wrong piece of equipment was used, but the test still passed, you can still potentially use some of that information. You just need to describe that in your testing report. So kind of a question we get quite a bit is how do we identify the testing our device needs, and where do we start? So a few different ways to do this, and they're all very applicable to multiple devices and to this development process. So first would be using your design traceability matrix. So as we talked about the previous webinar, using your user needs input output matrix to identify what you need to test and how you're going to test it is one of the first steps. You also need to look at the regulatory requirements for your device. So identify what testing is required in your product code, as well as what testing might have been done by your predicate. A lot of times there are guidance documents specific to types of devices, whether that's a diagnostic device, a monitoring device, an orthopedic device. They have guidances from the FDA that will outline what type of testing you need to do specifically for your product. External standards as well. There's a lot of external standards that outline what testing you need to do. If you need to do testing with a testing lab, things like biocompatibility, electrical safety, things like that, you can also discuss with the testing lab what testing you need to do. We've seen recently a trend that the testing labs are shying away from providing advice as to testing and taking less regulatory risk and pushing that to the company. So it's critical that you have a consultant or a group with you that you trust to make sure you are doing the right testing for your device. If you are still unsure, you can also do a pre-submission meeting with the FDA where you meet and propose your testing plan to them and get their sign-off prior to starting testing. If you have a new type of device or a new type of technology, it's good to have a pre-submission meeting to confirm that they agree with your testing before you invest the money and time to start that testing. Just a similar graphic. So make sure you're using your traceability matrix to define your inputs. So you have to have requirements first to test your device. Make sure that these specifications are able to be tested, and then use the verification testing to ensure that your outputs meet your design inputs. With the regulatory requirements, a little more detail on how to actually identify this information. So we work with a lot of early stage companies that are going through their first medical device and their first regulatory process. So a lot of times we will do a regulatory assessment to identify this is most likely the product code for your device. This is a likely predicate. A lot of times the product code information on the FDA website will have either consensus standards or reference standards that you can use to do testing for your device. The predicate summary for your predicate device also will most likely outline what testing they did. So you want to be very aligned with your predicate and the testing they did. If not, it's going to raise questions to the FDA as to why you didn't do the same testing as your predicate. So making sure you review the FDA's website, you review and identify any FDA guidance documents related to your device, and you review very detailed the predicate device information and testing. There is a pathway to do a FOIA request where you get the information that was submitted in actual 510K for your predicate devices or similar devices. These requests take a lot of time, typically multiple years to get processed. So don't typically recommend those unless you really need to get through. There are some services that offer these ones that have already been through the FOIA process to be purchased. So you can look at those as well if you do need that information to support your FDA submission. Addition to the consensus standards and guidance documents, also can use certain justifications to not doing testing. So there is this process of using a risk review, using risk justification or benefit risk justification to say, we know our predicate did this product. We think we don't have to do it because we're using the exact same materials and the exact same process. So FDA, do you agree that we can be exempt from this specific test. So that process does work. We've been successful with that before, but you just need to have sound justification in your quality documentation and your design and risk documentation to propose that to the FDA. This justification can also be reviewed in a pre-sub as well. With internal testing and external testing, so there's some options for both. Typically, companies have to do a little of both, a little of external testing, a little of internal testing. External testing is referring to the process of specifically sending your product or your materials to external testing laboratories for them to do testing to consensus standards. So things like 10993, which is the biocompatibility standards, 60601, which is the electrical safety standard. These are very common standards that there are a lot of test labs that do this type of testing. So when you're getting your initial quotes, you should get quotes from multiple testing labs, compare quotes and timelines. If possible, so this is something we've seen with 60601 testing, where a company might have facilities at multiple places within the country or external, and they want to bounce your device around to different facilities. If possible, we really prefer to leave it all at one facility and make sure they do all the testing in-house at that one facility. Also very, very key to determine timelines. Some of these can be busier than others, so make sure that your device will get tested and be a priority and aligned with your goals for your FDA submission. Once all that's been reviewed, quotes have been signed, payments been sent, then you can send your device for testing. It's also good when you're interacting with the testing labs to identify how many devices, how much material they'll need to do proper testing. So you can plan that in your manufacturing batches for testing. Rook helps our clients with this process. We have relationships with a lot of testing houses for all types of testing. So if you do need help with this V&V testing and identifying the best testing facility, you can definitely reach out to Rook for that support as well. Touching a little bit on different types of testing specifically. So we have 60601 testing. So this is the electrical safety testing. So there's high-level 60601 testing that applies to all electrical devices and additional application to devices that are contacting the body. And then there's also subset standards tied to specific types of devices or types of device technology. So this would be listed here. We have some home use devices. So if your electrical device is going to also be used at home, then you'll need to do the 60601-1-11 testing. If you have an X-ray system, there's a specific standard for that. Lab equipment, so diagnostic devices, things like that, have their own 61010 standard. A lot of wearables and things like that have their own standard as well. So there's one for pulse oximetry, there's one for a clinical thermometer, one for hearing aids. So when you're doing your review of applicable standards, you need to make sure you're planning for this testing as well, because this testing has to be sent to an external lab. You have to plan with that. With some of these, like the pulse oximetry, you actually have to provide clinical data to the testing lab, and then they use that in their testing as well. High-level process for people that have never gone through 60601 testing, similar to what we talked about with external labs. We want to review the quotes and agree for all the tests to be completed, shipping the devices to the testing. Take note that some of this testing might be destructive, and so you might not get these devices back. So if you have testing you want to do on your device, you might want to do some of that first before you send it to, if you have a limited number of product. They also review, and this is a very key area that not a lot of people realize, the 60601 testing and standard also covers a lot of other internal documentation. So they'll review your SOPs, specifically around design and risk. They'll review your risk management file to make sure you have the correct risks and hazards identified, as well as mitigation in your file. They'll review your instructions for use and your labeling, because all of these are within the standard and scope of testing. So you'll submit all this information as well as the device, data sheets, material specs, additional documentation around installation, essential performance. A lot of companies have very detailed checklists that you need to do before you can start testing that are 20+ pages. So you have to complete that as well. and then you can start testing. Once you get the report, you need to make sure you review it in detail, because the FDA will review it in detail and call out any gaps. So it's better to make sure you've identified these gaps before it's provided to the FDA, and you can go ahead and ask them to update certain things, review things before submitting to the FDA. So that's kind of the high level on typical mechanical devices. We did want to touch a little bit on software V&V as well. So similar to your design matrix, the same requirements apply for software devices. So you need to define your requirements for your software. So this is typically your SRS, software requirement specs. So how it performs, what data requirements you are, how data is transferred, how it's controlled, all those things should be defined in your software requirements specifications, and then show how they are met with your design outputs or your SDS. The actual testing will be done with a similar process. You actually have to write test cases to define what testing you're doing and what the acceptance criteria is. With the testing, you also need to define the environment and who will be testing this. There are automated testing tools that can be used as well, but just like we said earlier, you have to document the testing for software before you start and the acceptance criteria before you start testing. With software submissions specifically to the FDA and international submissions as well, all of the precursor information, all of the user needs, design inputs, requirements, outputs, all that stuff will be reviewed as well as the testing. There are different levels of testing determined by your risk profile of your device. So higher risk software have more testing, lower risk software will have less testing. So it's critical that you look at that and make sure you plan for that with your testing. One key aspect of software design testing is that you need to have a design freeze. You can't keep editing the software, adding features before you start testing. It's always very hard for software devices to get to design freeze. Even agile development, any type of development, you still have to have a frozen version of the code that you can test before you can move forward. Writing test cases, recording results, and then having a test report, very similar process for testing as well. So that's kind of high level software. Also want to touch a little bit on the internal bench testing. So the external standards we talked about, biocompatibility 60601, cover high level. A lot of times your device is specific to what you do exactly. So there's tests that aren't captured with standards. So you will need to do some internal bench testing to make sure you've captured all the features of your product. This includes what we talked about earlier, writing protocols, determining your sampling justification, your sample size based on risk, and then determining your pass-fail criteria for this. So all this should be formally documented and approved prior to starting internal bench testing. Once the testing is complete, you can write your result and summary, and then data analysis if needed. As we talked about earlier, if there are deviations from testing, you can write that in your test report as to if it's okay to use the results or if you need to do retesting. Lastly, what to do if you fail. So with the nature of any manufacturing, any new product, it is likely that something would fail. So you want to identify and summarize the failure in your test report, determine the root cause of the failure, and this covers everything. So 60601, software, biocompatibility, all of these things. Identify how to change the device, edit the device, change the software for a better result, capture these changes in your design history file, and then conduct retesting. And then repeat as necessary is the fun one, that if it doesn't happen the first time, keep working until you get the result you're working on, and that'll be the finished version of the device you can share with the FDA. So these ongoing design changes should still be captured in your design history file. That is the purpose and definition of design history file, to make sure you're capturing all these things throughout the process. All right, so we are going to pass it over to Axel to talk about some of his experience, and then over for the demo at the end.
All right. Thanks so much, Cal, for that overview. Let's see. Sorry about that. There we go. There we go. Thanks so much. All right. So following that great introduction and overview of what you need to do from a regulatory perspective, I'm going to talk a little bit about design verification, design validation when it comes to preparing and be ready for commercial launch and commercial success. And I want to start with a sort of a visual that is sort of going to be part of the message that I'm going to hone on in here today. And if you think about your journey, whether you are a medical device startup company bringing a device to the market for the first time, or you're a bigger company and this is one of many products that you have brought to the market, if you look at that regulatory success that Cal talked about, that is more like a milestone towards the commercial success that everybody's looking for. Of course, getting an FDA 510(k) clearance, it's a major milestone, right? So I don't want to reduce the importance of that, but from a methodology perspective and what we are trying to do, especially for your startup, is really to drive towards that commercial success. So I'm going to talk about, as you go through design verification and design validations, the considerations that you can have to prepare and plan for that commercial launch and distribution. So Cal talked about regulatory strategy, identifying what type of device that you have, and making sure that you know the expectations from regulatory authorities when it comes to data for safety and effectiveness. I'm going to start to talk about the stakeholders that you will have to satisfy in one shape or form when it comes to that commercial distribution. And really what you want to do is think about from a perspective of how you can make both the user and the payer excited, right? So for the users, they're going to use your device. What will they need to see to be convinced in using the device? Ideally, be as excited as this doctor here in this picture, right? And then when it comes to the payers, what will they need to see to pay for the product? And when I talk about what I need to see, typically that is data in one shape or form translated into different assets or just data as itself. Something to point out when it comes to medical devices in general is actually that the user and the payers are often different stakeholders, right? Sure, for like a plastic surgery, a private clinic, the person who owns that clinic might also be the surgeon, and he or she might be both the user and the payer. But in general, the user and the payer are two different individuals. So you kind of need to keep that in mind as you have to generate different data to satisfy both the user and the payer. So when it comes to the user, that's typically the easy one to figure out, right? Already early on, you're addressing a clinical need of sorts. It's usually pretty clear who is going to be using the device. But when it comes to the payers, that's where it can get a little bit more involved. And here in the United States, there are a few ways that devices are paid for. Just a few ways here. Patient pay. So there are certain type of procedures that we pay as patients out of pocket. That can be different type of dental procedures, plastic surgery, and other things. Hospital system and clinics, they buy products themselves. So that can be, if it's a smaller expense, a departmental expense. But if it's a bigger expense, you have to go through the value analysis committee that will be looking for different type of data and evidence to be convinced in buying your device. Reimbursement is a big deal here in the US, as most of us know. For that, you have CMS and private payers like Blue Cross Blue Shield. And, that's its own topic for, I was going to say for another webinar, but it would probably be several webinars. But lastly, also, I want to mention here, which actually is a very overlooked area, especially for first-time founders in startups, that's the Veterans Affairs, the VA, which actually in the US is the largest hospital system in the United States. I think they have something like 1,500 clinics across the US, but they're all within one system, and that is a different system compared to CMS, right? So I'm saying this all to say that as you are thinking about commercialization and also thinking about design verification and design validation, the data that you gather, these stakeholders, these entities, some of the data might be the same, but in many cases, they're looking for different type of data. So also from a DV&V and data gathering strategy, also you need to remember that as you launch your device, you might want to sell your device through different channels, right? So you can have patients paying for it out of pocket, and at the same time, you might be distributing through the VA. I mentioned this is typically primarily for the US that I talk about here. Just a quick note about Europe. I'm not going to go into any detail here, but if you plan to launch your device into Europe, while the EU MDR covers regulations in general across the board for all countries, what you need to do there. But remember that each country can have vastly different ways that devices are purchased, and then the associated data needed to convince those payers. So I've talked a little bit now about, thinking about the users. Who are the users? How can you make them excited? Who are the payers? What data do you need to achieve to make them to pay for your device? Of course, the question becomes, how do I figure this out? And I have this flow chart. It's a very, very high level flow chart from early idea of a medical device through design and development, through regulatory clearance or approval, into commercialization, and then an exit. So I'm just going to walk through this and then tie this into what I'm talking about in general. But if we start here in the early days where you have a technology and device idea that is going to address some sort of a clinical need that you have identified, the first thing that you should do, is really in-depth customer discovery, where you kind of look at, is this technical solution going to solve this clinical need that I have identified? And also to that end, will this be a viable business, right? Going back to the commercial success, right? So here, this is typically where you would be in pre-seed in a startup company, right? And you do some prototyping, you test your technology and all that kind of stuff, right? And this is also going back to some what Kyle talked about, where you would consider doing pre-submission. Once you have established your regulatory strategy, device classification, other things, then with that, you would then look for what type of data do I need to convince regulatory authorities, and for the FDA, this is where you then can do a pre-submission. Following that, you would then go into the design and development, the formal development of the device, which is then following design controls. And this is where you would then have the DV&V, design verification, design validation testing going on. And for that, you would then gather the data that you need to then satisfy, in this case, the FDA here, and eventually they will give their thumbs up. And now you are a medical device manufacturer, not an R&D startup. You're actually now a medical device manufacturer with devices in commercial distribution. From there, typically you would grow sales, and as a startup, you would look at some point for that exit that most of your investors would be looking for. Anyways, so what I have done here in this flowchart is also this dashed arrow, right? And the whole intent here with this dashed arrow is like, during this customer discovery that you do early on, it's not only then to figure out what you need to do for regulatory authority, but this is where you then need to really, really dive in to understand who your users are and who the different payers are, and also what type of data and evidence that they will need to see to be able to be convinced to pay for your device. And this kind of goes back to the first visual I had, right? Where I had the milestone on that mountain, like getting through the FDA, that's just a milestone into commercial distribution. Basically, the message here is really to have that foresight early on. This thinking about commercialization should never be an afterthought once you have your clearance. Then you're too late. And unfortunately, we see that a lot with early, first-time founders and startups, that of course getting through the FDA is a major undertaking, right? So it's natural that is going to consume pretty much all your focus. But the thing is that if you don't have the foresight and think about what you're going to have to do after that, is the risk that you run into major delays as soon as you get that clearance. I've seen companies waiting 1 to 2 years before they sell their first product. And this you can run out of money, right? If you venture backed, plus your investors, they're going to expect you to be able to sell your product as soon as you get that 510K clearance letter. So the message here is early on, really figuring out what you need to have when it comes to data for commercialization, as well as for regulatory clearance or approval. So once you've established that, right, once you know both what you need for say the FDA and for commercial distribution, then you can overlay that. And this is really where the strategy comes in, right? You can see the testing that you need to do in DV&V, say for the FDA, but then you can overlay that also what you need to do for commercial distribution. In many cases, you can also bundle that, so combine the testing, and that's really where you can save a lot of time, save a lot of money. So as an example, you might do an animal study to gather some data, say for the FDA. In that animal study, you might be able to then add just a couple of endpoints, and that data can then be used and leveraged later, rather than having to do a test at a different time, because as you know, that's a big undertaking to do those type of studies, right? So that's the whole strategy here. If you know the data that you need for different things, you can also bundle and be very, very efficient, both from a time and money perspective. And the way to kind of keep track of this, the different ways that you can do this, one way is to put all these things into your design and development plan. So you have that front and center as you go through your development process, to make sure that you remember what type of testing that you need to do also for commercialization. What we are going to show you, that Jeff going to demonstrate that we can do in QuickVault, is to also have the transparency and control of also these type of things that you need to test for, which then also makes it very, very easy to remember as you get into the DV&V, what can we bundle? What can we combine here? Quick note also, of course, in the DV&V, you might not hit all the data points that you need. Just a quick note that you also need to plan for, in some cases, for post-market testing. You might want to run a small clinical study on your cleared or approved device to gather some data, whether it's for reimbursement or whether it's for getting the users excited. But I'm saying this all to say, capture this early on and have it in your plans. And as you fundraise, make sure that this is part of your fundraising. That will make everybody be on the same page, and your investors will understand, once you have, say, a clearance, that it's going to take a little bit longer time before you can actually get significant revenue. Another note is that I've talked a lot about gathering the data to convince users and payers, right? In many cases, you also have to translate this data into various type of assets, so marketing and sales assets. In many cases, that is publications that your sales reps can bring with them as to talk to different stakeholders, right? I'm also bringing this up in terms of being strategic and plan, to make sure that also not only that you think about the data that you need to capture, but also in terms of what you need to translate that into various type of assets, because that takes time and effort. So also make sure that you have that established early on, so you know what you need to do. Getting to the end here, but I wanted to point out, if you think what I talked about here is intriguing and you kind of want to learn a bit more about this specific topic and having the foresight to set yourself up for commercialization, there's a couple other things that we have on our website that I want to point out here. You can go to quickvault.viva.com. We have this resource page on here. We have more webinars, we have blog posts, but we also have a podcast called Quick Talk. And there are 2 episodes here that I've called out with these red squares here. Episode number 6 here with Steve St. George. He is a reimbursement expert. With him, we dive in and kind of talk more specifically about considerations for data needed for reimbursement. And in episode 4 here with Tom Ross, we talk specifically about this foresight that I've been discussing too. And not only about the data, there's a lot of other things that you want to consider in terms of setting yourself up to be ready to launch your product as soon as you get that CE mark or FDA clearance. So check that out. That's on our website. To kind of like segue this into what Jeff is going to talk about. So we've mentioned a couple of times that in QuickVault is a collaboration platform when it comes to design control, so design and development of medical devices. And in here, we do have, like I mentioned, everything that you can establish for your design traceability metrics. Tied to that is risk management functionality. We do have built-in design reviews and risk reviews, which makes it very easy to collaborate in a design and development project within QuickVault. And to that end, as we're going to look at here today, having that control that you need to kind of understand what testing that you plan to do, and also then again, to look for that overlap between data needed for regulatory submissions, but also data needed for commercial distribution. So with that, would like to hand it over to Jeff to show you just this.
Perfect. Thanks, Axel. Go sharing. Right. Okay. So today I'm going to go through QuickVault and really focus on the design and design verification and validation process. But of course, QuickVault itself, we offer a lot of different functionality. We have functionality to manage your documents, training, manage all your different quality events, so your non-conformance, your CAPA, change controls, and so forth, as well as managing your suppliers. But today I'll focus specifically on our design controls and risk functionality, and in particular, the latter stage where when you get to the DV&V side of things. Within QuickVault itself, you can see I am here on the products page. You can see all the different parts of the application right here on the left side. And for the purpose of this demo, we're a company that is in the business of designing medical gloves. So now we're working on a product. Let's say we've developed a product that's actually entering the design verification and validation phase. So I'll jump into to this one right here. And within QuickVault, you can actually build out all your design controls, your design, the entire traceability matrix, track your user needs to your design inputs, design outputs, verification, and validation. In this case, we've already got a number of these things already pre-filled out. Of course, for gloves, your high-level user needs, well, obviously, they need to protect, they need to be comfortable, durable, biocompatible, sterile, and so forth. But the thing is, not only do you track your regulatory requirements with QuickVault, you can also track your commercial requirements as well, as something to that Axel had mentioned. So you can also note that right within QuickVault. Your design input, these are your more detailed measurable requirements. So for example, when it comes to protection, well, you want to get more detailed about, okay, well, it's got to be resistant to certain liquids, it's got to be low permeability. When it's comfortable, well, comfortable for at least 8 hours, and from a tensile strength, needs to adhere to the proper standards. Since we've already pre-filled and set this up, let's just jump right into the design verification and validation. So if I wanted to go in and create some of these tests, let's say for our gloves, well, we need to do some durability testing. So I'm going to put that one in, and then our durability test, well, we want to link it to the proper inputs and outputs, something that Kyle mentioned is really important. So you can link, say our durability one. This one, well, ties into our design output for, it ties into our design input for maybe let's need to be sustainable for at least 12 hours. And then this would tie to our material spec and our glove drawing. And similarly, you can tie all your different design controls to your risk. So in this case, this particular risk around durability, well, potentially it could be tied to one of the contamination risks that the glove might tear. And of course, you can add related documents to all your different design verifications as well. So for example, in this case, maybe we already have our testing protocol and our testing report that you can link to for your individual records. So if we go through creating maybe another example besides durability testing, we need to do tensile testing. So you can create that one. And again, you want to link them to different records here. Oops, tensile testing. Let's say this, in the case of tensile testing, well, this one relates to our design input for conform to a specific standard, and also relates to our material spec and our glove drawing. And if we have the documents available, we can also relate those documents too. So I'll pop this one here, and it'll keep going to get through all your different verifications. When it comes to design validation, you can do the same sort of thing. So in the case of design validation, let's say biocompatibility testing, this is often the design validation. And this one with validation, this is tied to your user needs instead. So this one, potentially it would be user need for biocompatibility and our material spec. And then if we had maybe another potential test for simulated actual use, create that one here, and then I can link that one to this corresponding user needs. So maybe in this case, it'd be about comfortable, durable coverage, and potentially it ties back to our design outputs. So within QuickVault, you can actually link all your design verifications, as I mentioned, to your design inputs and outputs for traceability, just to ensure that the outputs, so your specs drawings, meets the inputs, and correspondingly, your design validation, you want to make sure your user needs meet your design outputs for traceability, to ensure that your product really meets your desired user needs and intended use. So let's say we've got we'll stick with 2 each. We've got all our design verification and validation all set up within QuickVault. You can actually formally go through a design review right within the system itself. Of course, you could do this for more than just your DV&V side of things, but for the purpose of today's demo, we'll focus on that. So we're going to jump in. Let's say we go ahead and do design DV&V review. So I'm going to jump in here. I'm going to go and add the different verification and validations that we had just created here. And let's have a meeting. We'll have a few folks in the meeting itself. I'm going to include Axel in the meeting here, and then maybe one of our friends, let's say Dora here, we'll add her as well. Once you've got all the individuals and you're ready to conduct the formal meeting, then you actually hold a call, maybe just something like this on a Zoom call, or you might actually get together in a meeting room, and you can actually start the review right within QuickVault. So you can go through and run through each of the different design controls. So in this case, let's say, hey, the tensile strength, this one is good. The durability test, we reviewed it, this one was good. Simulated actual use, maybe we had an issue, we want to keep that one open. And then biocompatibility was good, and that one was okay as well. At the same time, you can actually document all your meeting notes right within QuickVault as well. For example, you can take notes, maybe make all the notes here. If there's any attachments you want to include, maybe it's additional slides that you want to include as part of the meeting itself. You can include all that content right within QuickVault itself. Once you've completed the meeting and wrapped up all the different controls and you feel like you're good to go, then you can send it for closure and do the approval right within QuickVault. So this would typically be maybe you're someone on the QA side of things, maybe whoever's leading the project, potentially an independent third party. You can send it out for closure, and then all the individuals, they'd be notified via email. They get a task assigned to them within QuickVault, and they can jump in and approve the actual design review itself. So I'll jump in. I'll just approve it here with your Part 11 compliant electronic signature, and you've approved the design review. One of the neat things about QuickVault itself is not only do you input this content, you can generate a report with all your design review notes and the signature in here as well. So I'm going to save a copy of this one here and open it up just to show you what that might look like. There you go. And so here is the output of what we just put together. We have run this design review here. We put some meeting notes. We approved 3. We kept one of these open. And then the approval here itself was just approved right now by a user. And so, of course, I did this for design reviews for kind of the DV&V side of things, but you can do this for everything. So your user needs, your design inputs, outputs, you can run through the exact same process for all the different needs. Let's say fast forward, we've completed all our testing, and we want to go take a look at our risks. So within QuickVault, you can document all your different risks for your particular product. You analyze your risk using hazard analysis, and then you can choose your different risks based off of the ISO 14971 design hazard categories. For the demo, we've already pre-filled the field form, so we've gone through the initial risk assessment. And now that we've actually conducted the test for the durability testing, let's say we can go and update one of our risks. So potentially the potential for risk before we were using a different material, we actually made some tests and we ran a new test for our material. Hey, well, you know what, based on some of the changes that we did, well, maybe the severity is still the same, but the probability now has dropped from probable to improbable, and the risk level has reduced to low. And I can document all this information right within QuickVault. If I need to, I can provide notes as well as an attachment to upload any records for a residual risk evaluation. And if necessary, I can also do the benefit risk analysis right within QuickVault here as well. So I can provide all that information. You can see the risks are all linked to your different design controls as well as any related records I might have. Once I've gone through all of my risks, so let's say this one is ready for a review, you can conduct a risk review in a similar manner to how we just did the design review. So you can go through the same process. Really, the only major difference between a risk review, I'll just jump into one that's already been completed, between a risk review and design review is that instead of selecting your design controls, so your user needs, your design validation, verification, you're selecting risks that you go through. And this is really useful because you can track how like how you're addressing product risk, not only during design development, but can you also include this as part of your post-commercial activities, such as customer complaint investigations. So putting all this together, we've been able to track our design controls, design review risks, and risk reviews. For other content that's related to your products, we've got our documents tab. So this is where you can add and relate any of your additional product-related documents so that you can store your project plans, reports, design transfer, design changes, procedures, so forth. Everything can be put in here, and then you can categorize your individual documents. The reason why this is really helpful is because this actually allows you to automatically generate a completed design and development file, as well as a medical device file, and that would save hours of time. For those that are kind of familiar with that process, it can be quite tedious getting all the mappings and having that all put together. The file formats themselves are guided by ISO 13485. For the US market, we're following the new QMSR terminology. For those, if you're thinking from the QSR, you'll know the design development file more as the design history file, and you're probably more familiar with the device master record terminology. So I'll just show you, based on all the content that you put together, you can actually generate one of these files. So if you go and generate your design development file here, I'll go through, I'll save a copy of this file here and bring it open. And then based on everything we put together, we would take all that content that you put into QuickVault, you generate all your plans, all our approved user needs, design inputs, design outputs, the verifications that we had just created, if they're related reports. So let's say there's a durability testing report that we get through. They're all related, mentioned here. This is not just a static document. You can actually jump back into QuickVault. So for example, the protocol here, I can actually pull it up and bring the protocol itself right within QuickVault. And you can take a look at the document as well. And everything, your design reviews, your design changes, all that content is put together, and we automatically generate this file for you. And we kind of describe how we generate all this content right within QuickVault. And similarly, if we were to generate a medical device file, we can pull all that content together and generate a file for that one automatically as well. Of course, if you prefer to have your own format and build your own index file, you can always just export a CSV version of all your design controls, your risks, and your documents, and then you can build it out yourself. But you have both options depending on what you prefer. And so that concludes my demo walkthrough of how you manage your design verification and validation process within QuickVault. We're able to easily build out a design control matrix. We actually conducted the formal design review and risk review right within QuickVault itself, built into the system. We're able to tie our risks together with our design controls and as well as the design controls to each other. And we're able to automatically generate the design development file and the medical device file. So at this point in time, that concludes our webinar. I'll switch over to Q&A if there's any questions from the audience.
Awesome. Jacqueline, do you want to?
Okay, we did have quite a few questions come in. One says, do you recommend any methodology to identify requirements and design inputs for medical devices?
You want to take that? Hal?
Yeah, I mean, I think, aligning with the standards, really just taking into consideration that your inputs need to be testable. So it needs to have specifications with tolerance, I think is one key thing. So aligning with that, it can be kind of a very daunting task if you've never done it before and you're just trying to write requirements. But I think just going into each aspect of your device, how it works, and what your specifications or requirements are, would be a good start for defining those.
Awesome.
And then I would say I did see a few related to human factors, so didn't have a ton of time to touch on that today. Human factors testing is critical and also typically required for certain types of submissions. So it is important. It should align with the FDA guidance and the 62366 standard. Typically, with your usability, you want to identify critical tasks to have your device functional by the end user, and then you define the different user groups for your product, and then you observe them and make sure they're able to complete each of these critical tasks with the typical information that you would provide, whether that's training, instructions for use, whatever it might be. And then you summarize the findings of that usability study. A lot of times it's good to have a survey there as well and get feedback from the users that you can then use to update either design features or features around labeling and instructions with that. So I think that's the best practice for usability. It is critical, and in a lot of cases, it is required for FDA submission as well.
Okay.
Sorry, Jacqueline, I was going to say we have a cybersecurity question here that I can answer. So the question is, should we have cybersecurity requirements for a software device as a user need, or design inputs unlinked to user need? So if you look at cybersecurity, there are two things to cybersecurity. One is the regulations, say from the FDA, in terms of what you need to comply to with their from their perspective. As a matter of fact, most hospital systems and others actually have a higher requirements for cybersecurity. So just meeting the requirements by the state FDA is typically not sufficient. So to that end, it directly becomes a user need that you need to fulfill cybersecurity requirements for your customers for them to even be able to buy your device, right? So there are two ways cybersecurity ties into design control. One is then from the user need and those requirements that you need to fulfill, and the other part is from your risk assessment within risk management. And like Jeff just showed you here in QuickVault, your risk assessment is tied into your design control matrix. So that will drive the testing and the things that you need to do from a cybersecurity perspective.
Awesome. Thanks, Axel. Another one says, can you please elaborate on test method validation requirements comparing DV&V methods, process test methods, and release testing?
You want me to take that, Kyle?
I was trying to find it. I don't see it in the list.
I can take a first stab at that. So there's two different things there, right? So for test method validation and things of that nature is typically in relation to process validation, which is a separate topic that you need to conduct to make sure your process is in compliance, right? So process validation is a separate effort that you need to do. If nothing else, before design transfer within design controls. So while some design verification, design validation is more associated with the device itself, test method validation, IQ, OQ, PQ, gauge R&R, and things of that nature, that's all in relation to what you need to do to demonstrate control of your process, which is actually a very important piece when it comes to design control, because when you build devices that you're going to put through DV&V, of course you need to be able to demonstrate that you had control of how those devices were manufactured, so you can demonstrate the equivalence of those devices to the final device. Hopefully I answered the question, but design verification, design validation, typically around the safety and effectiveness of the device. What you ask for about in terms of test method validation and other things is in relation to process validation, which is a critical part when it comes to building devices for DV&V and for commercial distribution.
Yeah, one point on that as well. In some cases, we've seen that the companies will have like a custom test rig or piece of equipment that's used to test. So if you are building something specific to your product, that instrument needs to be validated if it's going to be used in testing. So there are certain situations where you're creating a custom piece of equipment to test your very specific device. That piece of equipment needs to be validated to show it can identify good product from bad product. So that's one small scale instance where you might have to do some test validation on a piece of equipment during or prior to DV&V that we have seen.
Okay. What level of test methods validation should we apply to our internal test methods? What are some things to look out for?
Yeah, I can take a stab. I can take a stab at that. So I would start with I would start by looking at what those tests are used for when it comes to going back to the requirements of your device and the risk assessment, right? So you've developed internal test methods to test your device. What is the criticality of those tests, and what happens if you fail in those tests, right? That you actually let bad product pass through and into the market, right? So I would approach that from a risk-based perspective, and then detail different levels of controls that you need to apply to that test method. I don't know if you, Cal, if you have anything else to add to that.
No, I think that's good.
Okay.
Thanks, Axel. If the supplier or outsourced designer asks for a system level V&V plan, what does that mean, and especially for the products that are in the early stages of development?
I think that's aligned with what we talked about earlier, just identifying for your regulatory path what testing you're going to need to do. It is critical to get that to your development firm. It'll help determine how many devices you'll need. It'll help determine kind of the timeline. Some of these tests, especially anything for like shelf life or stability, take a lot longer, because for real-time stability, you have to let it sit for 6 months at least, right? So you want to have this high-level V&V plan that aligns with your regulatory assessment that you can pass along to your manufacturer or design firm. So they're aware of everything that is going to need to be tested. They're going to have critical decisions on to what materials they can use, what antennas or chips or things like that they can use as well. So it's critical to have this identified very early in this process, so you're not wasting time or money designing the wrong thing.
Okay, this is a QuickVault related question. How does QuickVault support different product versions and generations being approved for different markets at the same time? Lifecycle management.
Say that again. You want to take that, Jeff? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll take it. I guess the question was around QuickVault supporting different product versions and generations. So in the demo, I went through it for one product, but at the very first page of the demo, there's different products. So you can have different products and you can manage your design controls for all different products concurrently or at different times, so that you have functionality available. Similarly, if you want to continue leveraging one after a launch and you have new versions of it, you can build on the existing one. And within the demo, we keep track of revisions. If there's new document reports, if there's new updates to it, you can keep track of all the different revisions. So all that functionality is built within the system itself.
Thanks, Jeff. Another one says, this person said, we are from a small company. We can't afford to have test automation for unit testing. What is the best way to handle this in an easy way?
I can answer that. That's going to be very device specific. And what type of device is it? Is it a heart valve, or is it a tongue depressor? What type of testing is it that you look for? So I think, if you reach out to me on LinkedIn or over an email, happy to provide additional guidance specific to your device.
Perfect. What documentation do you need to provide when it comes to HIPAA compliance? I feel like that's a little...
Yeah, so HIPAA compliance is, of course, a completely different aspect when it comes to FDA regulations, or notified bodies would be looking for, right? So, so it depends on how your device is utilizing patient-specific data, right? And whether you can de-identify that or not, and what are the risks that if something happens to your device, your software device, and that data gets publicly available, so it's going to be sort of like an answer from a politician. It kind of depends, depending on what your device is and how you're utilizing patient-specific data. But HIPAA regulations, as you probably know, is it's its own set of regulations to protect information for patients.
Perfect, thank you. Should indications for the device be tested as a part of design validation or the summative validation?
You want to take that, Cal?
I would say probably both. I think it overlaps for both. It's a somewhat vague question, but
how does usability testing fit in with V&V activities? For medical software devices, do you see a trend of overlap between verification and validation activities?
Yeah, I think I talked about this a little bit in my section that there is definitely some overlap, especially with software devices. I think for usability specifically, it is mostly part of the validation side. Some of the internal usability stuff could align with verification, but the majority of it would be considered in the bucket of validation for all devices, but specific for software.
Thank you, Kyle. Let's see. In what areas do you see the most need to bundle US and EU, including market-specific requirements? And are there any areas where it's better to consider testing in parallel according to each market specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the external testing, if you do know that you're going to be going into Europe, or even Canada has some of their own requirements as well, in the near future, then it definitely makes sense to make sure you're doing all that testing together, right? So if you're doing your electrical safety or biocompatibility, and there are slight differences, or even some of the wireless stuff, you want to do it all for all the markets that you plan to go into when you do the testing, so you're not having to go back and pay some of those upfront fees that are required when you're getting started with a test lab. So if you do plan to go into both, I would say bundle that testing as much as you can, especially with the external labs.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of goes back to what I talked about here today in terms like doing your due diligence early on, so you know all the data that you need, and to Cal's point, then make sure you bundle that as much as possible to save money and time.
Awesome. Which companies have been successful in designing clinical trials that can meet both regulatory and reimbursement endpoints to gain payment as quickly as possible? What can we learn from them to implement?
Yeah, personally, I don't have any specific examples to bring up. Again, going back to what I talked about, you need to understand early on what the requirements are, both then for regulatory and reimbursement. So you really have a good data collection roadmap that ties into your DV&V. The other part for that, in some cases, the FDA and CMS offer joint meetings where you can get together with both of them to discuss at an early stage in terms of what the expectations are for a specific device to minimize redo and delays. Hopefully that answered that.
Okay, last question that we have is 60601-1-11 standard applied to IVD-based home use device 2, or IEC 61010 is more applicable?
Yeah, I think I was trying to do some research on this during the webinar.
Me
I'm pretty
too.
sure that the 1-11 does still apply. So we are seeing
Yeah.
much more of these like at-home electronic readers. I think obviously during COVID, these things got much more popular. And pretty sure that those do have some 601-11 requirements, as well as 1010 for stuff like infusion pumps and like body worn. Those definitely have 1-11 requirements, but I'm pretty sure that the home-based like reader products that are popular now have 1-11 requirements, as well as 61010.
Yeah, and I would say in general, any type of medical device that have some electrical functionality needs to be in compliance with the 60601 standard, right? So, since that also a recognized consensus standard by the FDA, so I would definitely agree that the -11 one is 100% applicable to an IVD that has some type of electrical functionality.
Well, it looks like that's the end of questions that we have. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to us through LinkedIn or visit either of our websites, and we'd be more than happy to discuss further with you. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I will be sending out the slide deck and the webinar recording later today. So after you receive those resources, if there's anything else we can provide you with, please don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you for joining us today.